G'day guys. This is a video on methylglyoxal, which is found in a number of foods, but also it is involved in just general metabolism. I know Paul Saladino recently has been making a big fuss about how ketogenic diets apparently increase it, but the metabolism of any food actually produces them. And then obviously there are certain foods that actually also have them in varying quantities inside the actual food itself. And if you ingest that food, so that's an exogenous source, a food source rather than an endogenous source, all metabolism of fatty acids. And even if you're, let's say, metabolizing something like, run out of other energy substrates and you end up metabolizing proteins, yes, you can get some as well. You get all, and where is the component coming from? From the metabolism of lipids? Well, it's the backbone, the glycerol backbone. It's the sugar component. Okay. Now, that sugar component, you can either produce gluconeogenic precursors, or you can basically, convert it into an energy source of glycogen or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you produce a certain amount that it's going to go one way or another, or exactly what the body's going to do, depending on its requirements. So even when you fast, you get into a very deep ketosis when you fast. Is somebody going to say fasting is going to cause you advanced glycation end products, really toxic sort of stuff? No. Anybody saying anything like that would be considered a charlatan. Why? Because you upregulate intracellular antioxidants when you're on a species appropriate diet, and those intracellular antioxidants eliminate the problem. So it's not a problem. It's just, if you could find a study that says anything. So Paul just goes away, finds a crackpot study that that pushes his narrative. It's a reductionist, designed to basically show the actual diet in a poor light in order to basically run a narrative. But let's say he omits a lot of other information, which is really important because that would be inconvenient for Paul, So this is basically I know that some of these ones were behind a paywall. I was able to get access to them, and also a preprint of some other things. And so I think that the reason why Bart didn't look at them at the time was basically because he just couldn't access them. And if you can't access them and look at them, well, you can't really critically assess them as work. I've been able to get access to them, so I'm going to look at those sort of things. Now, I'm going to put Bart's video up there at the top, link it. So he's already covered all the intro and all the other stuff that actually, Paul has been talking about. I'm just going to cover this metabolite that is produced in metabolism. It's sort of the Maillard reaction, as they call it. And let's get into it. I'll just share my screen. Give me a sec. So we've got Paul here. I'll just let the man speak and bury himself.
Ketogenic community is not talking about here is the fact that ketogenic diets themselves cause advanced glycation end products to increase, and not just any advanced glycation end product, an advanced glycation end product called methylglyoxal, which is clearly known to be harmful to humans. Allow me to substantiate these claims. The title of this study really...
Let me just shock you for a sec, Paul. Everything that we consume actually produces this. See? Glycated proteins, acetone, glucose being the big one, lipids if they're in peroxidation. See, you have to have peroxidation. It's not enough, acetone, which is a ketone body, if it's in a catabolism state, being broken down, yes, then you can actually get some methylglyoxal. You can also, if lipids are peroxidized, that means, pretty much you're going to get, remember, I've done a whole lot of videos covering even PUFA from animal sources, and you only get trace amounts of oxidative products and trace amounts of aldehydes. Very little. That's after cooking the meat, pork, for 3 hours. I've got a whole playlist on PUFA that I've actually done that covers all that information. People can go and check that playlist and get the information so you don't listen to people who are making up stuff. So unless you get peroxidation, not an issue. If you get very trace amounts, let's not forget when you're in a ketotic state, whether you're fasting, species appropriate diet or whatever, what you do is you upregulate intracellular antioxidants like glutathione. Do you see this? You can actually go all the way down and you continue going down here. You can go to pyruvate. You can go all the way down here to lactate and all that. Obviously, if you get to lactate, if we've got taurine in the system, you can actually push it into the Krebs cycle through pyruvate dehydrogenase, and from there, you can actually deal with it. So even acetone, that excess amount that can actually be converted into pyruvate, yes, because that's what we've talked about in the past. That can also be pushed into the Krebs cycle. So why would it go in this direction? AGEs. Well, if you're doing something inappropriate, Paul, like guzzling down, 400 grams of sugar, you're not going to upregulate catalase, glutathione, or any of these intracellular antioxidants like we do to be able to deal with this product so it doesn't go in this direction into advanced glycation end products and cause all these other problems that we talk about. If you ignore this little thing that's actually happening when you're in a low carbohydrate state, that it mitigates this advanced glycation end product problem that we see in diabetics, people, and like that, you're not going to have it. You're heading in that direction because you're affecting your glutathione status with all the contraindicated stuff you're shoving down your throat. So, that's the real story. So let's continue.
Really says it all. Ketosis leads to increased methylglyoxal production on the Atkins diet. You see here that even people who didn't get into ketosis on the Atkins diet increased methylglyoxal at a level of 1.67-fold. And they go on to say that samples from subjects with ketosis showed even greater increases in methylglyoxal, 2.12-fold. That's probably not a good thing.
Yes, but is that really a large amount, Paul? I beg to differ. I beg to differ on that. I'll cover that shortly. So let's look at the damn study itself. What is it talking about? Acetate. That's really what we're talking about here. Let's be bloody obvious. Oops. Remember, we're going down this pathway. So rather than actually read, oops. There you go. You can come in from glucose all the way down to pyruvate, or you could actually branch off here. Certain amino acids as well. And then here, the ketone bodies. And it's really acetone. So acetone then will go on to become through these enzymatic pathways will get your byproduct will actually end up with some methylglyoxal. But if you've got upregulated glutathione through this system, sorry, my dyslexia is hitting in. Glyoxalase system, the glyoxalase system, you can actually deal with this problem, okay? Because it does involve glutathione, the glyoxalase system. You know, when we look at it through here, what are we looking at? We're going through a number of enzymes and we're going, you know, all the way through here, which involves production of D-lactase and glutathione. We need glutathione, you know, to deal with all this. There are some bacteria also that do a bit of this sort of stuff. It's the reduced form of glutathione. Just to cover that point. So let's look at this acetone levels. So it is in the evening and my screen has gone and everything's gone red. So you'll have to persevere with that sort of stuff because I do have my circadian rhythms to consider. A blue light exposure, so to speak. Everything's gone yellow. So methylglyoxal, as you can see on the Atkins, it goes up. On this one, it goes up because of, and if we go down here, if you see, acetone. Acetone, you know, all these things are related to acid. Okay, that is the key thing, you know, and those who are compliant have more. Again, because it's all about acetone. Okay, it's not the other stuff. So let's make that quite crystal clear. It actually even says, you know, from that glycerol backbone, you know, so, and it pretty much covers all that sort of stuff. Talks about very low carbohydrate diets and stuff like that. Okay, so it's all about acetone. Okay, so that's quite clear. So what's going to give us that? There are two types, let me make that quite clear, two types of ketogenic diets. One is a plant-based one. One isn't. One is a species-appropriate diet. Remember this video? The myth about fiber, how fiber causes constipation and bloating. This is a study. I didn't bother downloading it since Paul Mason has already done a video and covers this and looks at also the type of ketones that are produced by a plant-based diet and an animal-based diet. Oh, how unfortunate. Acetate is much higher. See that? Even butyrate. In animals, isovalerate and isobutyrate is much higher. And these ones don't have that problem. Got it? So a species-appropriate animal-based diet doesn't have this problem. Also, it doesn't it puts you in a mild ketosis when you're eating sufficient protein, a one-to-one protein to that. On top of that, you're basically, because you're doing that, you're also producing these other ketone type bodies from protein, and not these ones from plants. These in particular, in greater amounts. But this one's a key issue. The acetate is the key issue. That's the one that actually goes on. So, yeah, it's a bust, that whole theory. As you can see, Paul gets it wrong again. And most people that do a ketogenic diet nowadays, unfortunately, do a high fat, very low protein based. And when you do a very low protein based, you miss out on certain nutrients that are critical for some of these systems to work. I'll get into it shortly, but we need to cover a few extra points.
If you had any doubts about methylglyoxal, consider these papers. The title of this paper is also quite revealing. Methylglyoxal promotes oxidative stress and endothelial dysfunction. That's not good. The conclusion of this study, which is done in rats, is that the present study provides further evidence for methylglyoxal as one of the causative factors in the pathogenesis of atherosclerosis and the development of macrovascular diabetic complication.
Well, in diabetic people, yes, you do get a vast increase in advanced glycation in products and stuff like that. That's because people who are diabetic are very deranged. So, you know, and they have really poor glutathione status. And if you've got really poor glutathione status, you can't deal with these metabolites of eating. So, I mean, I just to be just if we Google it, just Googling it, just to basically, what does this study say? Methylglyoxal, you can find any study that says any bloody stuff, Methylglyoxal, a highly reactive carboxyl compound, is inevitably formed as a byproduct of glycolysis. Not lipolysis, glycolysis. Okay? So obviously, if you increase your ketone bodies, you're going to take the 3 fatty acids to produce ketone bodies. And what's going to left behind is the glycerol backbone, the sugar component. Now, that sugar component can actually be processed and used to produce, glucose, glycogen storage. If somebody's sedentary, isn't doing a lot of activity, and these people that they were looking at in that study obviously weren't athletes, okay? Let's just be honest about this. They are not going to have that repletion of that sort of stuff into glycogen. So then it's just glucose. It's going to enter the bloodstream and it's going to go. And, if you're replete with glycogen, you've got to take it somewhere. So either you convert it into fat and store it, or you shuttle some of it off to basically get oxidized and your blood sugar will go slightly up. That is probably what caused that sort of issue for those people by going very high ketosis. Maybe even some of those people may have had some underlying issues as well. Don't know. Without sufficient control and stuff like that, who knows in that regard. So we'll leave that and we'll move on. Okay, this one I didn't download. I just looking at the general. They just cover a few points in terms of the formation. Methylglyoxal can be formed in foods through 5 pathways. The first dominant pathway is the Maillard reaction. That's when you heat severely sugars. That means when you actually brown sugars. Any carbohydrate, most carbohydrates will be the ones that actually have the highest methylglyoxal formation. All animal foods and other things, even if you overcook them, you get very little in comparison to everything else. Okay, so the Maillard, during the Maillard reaction, hexones, that is glucose and fructose react with amino acids to generate this SNF base, which is a further conversion of amidori products. Amidori undergo this sort of change. Anyway, we won't go into it. But it's, again, this glycating effect. And we know that glucose and fructose are the key glycating factors that cause this problem. So, yes, you can get a slight increase if you do these limited studies where people are not fat adapted. And so they will have a certain period where their blood sugars are not coming down, especially people like modern people and all that. So there'll be more circulating blood sugar in comparison. But as these people transition, because remember, this was only for, in this study, as they looked at these people were only for a very short amount of time. I'll just go back. They only jumped in at about, in that period that it did about 2 months, 60 days. And most of these people came off a SAD diet. So obviously there is an adaptation phase and all that. But also remember, what are most people put on when they do ketogenic diets? Plant-based ones, primarily plants, very little protein. And so they produce more acetate anyway. So that's another issue in itself, another compounding variable that we don't get on an animal-based diet. We get more isovalerate. And that doesn't cause any of those sort of problems that Paul is alluding to. Again, when you're on a species-appropriate diet, like the Maasai, and, I've done the blue zones. There's a playlist, and I cover a number of their Maasai information, and some of the interviews that I did with Mary Ruddock. She actually went and checked their ketones, and their ketones are gravitating around 1 millimole. They run a low-grade ketosis. They don't run high ketosis. So again, when people are on a species-appropriate diet, eating sufficient protein and all that, you don't get these high ketone levels. But then again, if it was a problem, remember, the higher the ketone levels, eventually your intracellular antioxidants will be upregulated. In some people, they can take a couple of months before the upregulation of these intracellular antioxidants. And the reason for that is because people are either nutrient deficient of the key components like selenium and many other things that are required. And so there's an adaptation phase that can take up to 6 months. Now, that was only done over 2 months. So obviously, when you become fat adapted, when you become, you cease to be deranged in a sense, you will upregulate your intracellular antioxidant systems, catalase, glutathione, all these. They will mitigate that problem. And this is the problem with short-term studies. You don't see those effects. Where when Christopher Gartner did the A to Z study, that plant-based academic that Bart's done a couple of videos on him, and because it's a charlatan, but he did that study and actually showed Atkins was superior. All the actual key markers of inflammation, all that came down. C-reactive protein, many other things. But there was a phase of adaptation. Even he recognized that. Paul finds a study, which is a short-term study. Sometimes they're even worse, like 2-week studies. You can't even fat adapt within that period, most people, let alone people that have come from a SAD diet to basically upregulate all these pathways and correct a lot of their functioning of their body to be able to be properly fat adapted. And what they tend to do is they tend to put them on more plant-based. They tend to generate far more acetone. And that's a problem because it goes back to the liver and can be converted into glucose. That's an issue in itself. That's why you need people that are fat adapted, and then you can look at a proper group rather than this sort of makeup stuff that people doing all sorts of studies constantly. I have my foundation. That's the N15 data. If I ever doubt myself, I always remind myself about the N15 data, because any academic can fabricate whatever they like. That's the reality. Anyway, so that's pretty much that. Now, in this other study, methylglyoxal, the dark side of glycolysis, because that's really what it is, let's be honest about it. And they talk about that this glycolase system that actually does a lot of things, and pretty much they say that methylglyoxal is part of advanced glycation end products. But again, it's usually a carbohydrate-rich diet that we see this primarily, which is associated with severe pathologies, including diabetes, aging, and neurodegeneration. We see that on a standard diet. So really, that's what generates the majority of these methylglyoxal and advanced glycation end products. Remember, these people, because of being deranged, their intracellular antioxidants are in the toilet. So they can't clear this stuff out properly. And so, considering the high energy requirements, glucose of the brain, one should expect that the cerebral glycolase system is adequately fitted to handle methylglyoxal toxicity, especially when you've got intracellular antioxidants upregulated. So anyway, this is a Japanese study, and it looks at the sort of methylglyoxal in a number of foods. You won't, when it comes to animal foods, it's very little. That's why they don't even register. It's usually things like coffee, will have a small amount, decaf. Instant coffee has even less, it's a third. Cacao is a bit more. Instant tea is quite low. Sugary milk, the non-fat sugary milk is a bit higher, obviously. Things like, even compared to instant tea, soya sauce is much higher, paste and stuff like that. Things like wine, alcohol, you'll find things along that line. And this is sort of a test on that. Now, let's take a look at honey. Remember here, we're talking about very, very low levels. And if you look at this chart here, I'll go back to the honey, but I just want to cover this. Okay, this is in mils, micrograms. So 1 mil is similar to 1 gram, just for people to know that. It's the metric system. So 1.5 in whiskey, apple brandy, 0.32, wine, 0.57, Japanese sake, 0.26. I should drink more of that. Joking. Still nice. Instant coffee, 1.6. So you can see the coffee is actually brewed coffee, which is, full brewed with all the stuff in it and all that, is actually up to 7. Quite more than the instant coffee. Black tea is very low. Green tea's trace elements, but we don't want it because it's got certain compounds that can actually increase senescence. So that CG's CGCG type thing, or that compound, the polyphenol, that can actually increase senescence. So we don't want that. Soft drinks, probably like those. Bread, toast is a bit higher. Soya sauce is quite substantially higher, and soya paste is much higher than toast. And when we look at the micrograms per gram, so just to get an idea, so that's micrograms. So, 1,000 to get, so you need to get to a milligram so that's micrograms. You got it on a gram. So oops, where did that go? Just having some technical problems. So the 800 divided, you're going to get point in Manuka honey, you're going to get about point per gram, 0.8. So 0.8 is very similar to that. Coffee's going to have slightly more. It's going to be probably about root beer, about that level. So, and most other things have trace amounts. So all other foods have trace amounts because it's the sugar component, really, that is. Obviously, coffee doesn't have a lot of sugar in it, but it does have a certain amount of compounds that actually can be generated. But instant coffee's got far less. But again, it's because of the burning. It's because of the heating and burning. So, as we said, it is a toxin. And these are a number of other things. The amount in certain beverages, the way they're brewed. So those are, obviously because we have to compare it now, because that was in quantity, in terms of quantity of an item, but it actually, a brew amount, even 1 cup of coffee brewed is just going to have very little in comparison. Okay, so it's going to have about 0.47 or 0.73 micrograms, and compared to, decided to work. I freaking hate when it actually resizes. Anyway, now at least works. Hopefully it doesn't die on me. So if we're looking at, these are brewed coffees. As you can see, there are differences between brewed coffees. They can be very low and some can be quite high, depending on the brewed coffee. So there's a lot of variations. I'll link those up. People can actually look at them and try and actually see which coffees and which, and there may be different styles. I mean, I haven't gone into the details, to be honest. So 0.73. So it's about 91% of equivalent of, in terms of, if you're just having like a gram. But let's be honest, who's going to have a gram of honey? Okay. What is Paul having? He's having about, I think, isn't he up to I think he's at about 200 grams now of honey per day. And the other 200 comes from fruit, apparently. I think so. From what he's actually claimed himself in one video that Bart actually. So to 1,000, which is 1 kilo. So that's that amount times, and he uses those high quality ones, which usually have much higher. So I'll be nice to him. I'll actually put it down in the lower of the top of the high quality ones. I'll put it 600. So that will still give him the equivalent for that quantity of 120 milligrams for the quantity that he's having, because it's 800, 600 for a kilo. So 200 grams, which is 0.2 of a kilo, is basically that amount, 100, So even compared to that, which is basically divide that by the coffee by 0.8, by brewed coffee. Oh, what am I doing? Sorry. 120 divided by 0.8. It's about 150 times more glycating than one coffee, or 75 times more glycating than 2 coffees, which I usually have a day. So still way, way more glycating. I think with my upregulated intracellular antioxidants, I'm doing fine, because I'm not engaging the Randall cycle with contraindicated high carbohydrate garbage. So I don't think I have that problem whatsoever. And let me just unshare. And as you can see, as a very healthy looking 56-year-old, I look a hell of a lot younger than Paul. He looks quite, aging, his skin complexion and all that in comparison. He reminds me when I was in my 40s, before I had my cardiovascular bypass surgery. And I was pasty. My skin was really bad. Had all sorts of things coming off it, and it looked bad. I looked ragged and pasty, and ugh. So Paul's not looking that good. I'm not saying that I don't cheat. I drink alcohol. I went to a function on this Wednesday of this week. We went up to Lonnie, and I can tell you I had a few drinks and I did a few contraindicated things. So I'm not any angel, but I never claimed that. But neither do I say that I'm doing this, that I'm doing certain things. But I try to minimize the indiscretions that I do. But I don't claim that they are, I'm not going to claim that alcohol is healthy for you. I know it's not. I'm not going to claim some other thing that I actually ate, like what was it, a lemon slice, really nice. It's been a long time, but they usually make it traditional. They put a lot of sugar. It's more creamy sort of stuff. But again, it's not an indicated food. My ancestors definitely didn't eat it. So I'm not going to claim something which I know would be a lie, but I don't do that. I mean, me and Bart are pretty honest about, if we cheat, we tell you. We don't basically hide it. It's not our style. But that, just because I'm not consistent, has nothing to do with the science. The N15 data is quite clear what our species was on, and it wasn't on 200 grams of sugar of honey every single bloody day, because it didn't exist out in nature. It was seasonal, and it was consumed in the honeycomb itself, as Mary Ruddock pointed out. And that hit, and I've actually done a video covering the composition. It's got a lot of fat and protein in it. It's not very sweet either. It's only when you get the stuff out. It's like the milk. Normal milk has a small amount. You can have a glass of milk, 2 glasses of milk, and you'll still be in ketosis, because you're only getting very little in terms, So if you're getting like 2 glasses, which is about like half a litre of milk, that's 500 mils. Each 100 mils is about, at most, it's around about 4 grams of sugar. 5, that is 20 grams. That's below the 50-gram mark by a big margin. It's about 40% of the 50. Most people can still remain in ketosis or low-grade ketosis at 50 grams. let alone at 20, if that's all you're getting, 2 glasses of milk, like the Maasai do with blood. So it's a complete and utter irrelevance in that regard. So let me just share my screen again so we can cover a few extra points as we move along. Anyway, I did cover that. I've covered that. The amount of stuff in the actual Manuka honey, and he would have something similar to that. Oxidative stress and aging, yes, we know. They cover some of this sort of stuff. And when you look, we're talking about this sort of break, you talk about this oxidative stress. This happens primarily it doesn't happen in a ketogenic diet. It doesn't happen in an animal-based diet. Okay? Mitochondrial electron chain ROS. Nah. We don't get this problem of excessive, but you do get a bit of methylglyoxal from oxidation. It's just a byproduct for all oxidation, but we don't get as much. Anyway, so the glycolase system. So this one here, sorry. So as you can see, you can either inhibit that, which is a positive, or activate it. So activation or inhibition, small molecules that regulate it. Say in the cell, you can regulate this enzymatic pathway. If you regulate this enzymatic pathway, it inhibits methylglyoxal and all these problems. Got it? Taurine, methylglyoxal. It's a preprint, this one. I'll attach it, don't worry. I'll link it. See, it lowers it. These people that are actually, just to get an idea, this has been accepted now. Okay, this is to this journal, but at the time it was a pre-proof. So this is a randomized, double-blinded placebo with people with diabetes too. So we're not talking about healthy people here. We're talking about people with diabetes. And they gave them taurine, about 6 grams, I believe. And you can see the methylglyoxal came down. These people still didn't have upregulated glutathione, or they were still diabetics, okay? Obviously, if you're on a species-appropriate diet, your levels are going to be even lower. 1, because you're getting more taurine in the diet. 2, your intracellular antioxidants are upregulated to support those other pathways. That's the important stuff. Now let's get to the crux of the stuff. Taurine treatment prevents the arrangement of the hepatic G-glycoline cycle and methylglyoxal metabolism in a mouse model. Pretty much, without going too much into it, I'll attach it. People can glutathione, taurine, say no more. All the other stuff, just slightly. The redox, this is against glutathione, redox potential has improved. We know that it helps within the electron chain, taurine. So, and I'll go into it extensively in another video. That's for another time. So again, a species-appropriate diet. See, if you're doing a plant-based diet, low-carb plant-based diet, you're not going to get the benefits that the animal foods furnish you. One, to have different types of ketone bodies that won't go down that pathway. So you've got less of a problem to deal with, and the small amount of problem you have, you're dealing with extra taurine, and which is upregulating your intracellular glutathione, which eliminates the problem. You know, this is the system, requires glutathione. You know, so glutathione is a key thing. And taurine, the nice thing about taurine, even the lactate, D-lactate that comes into it, we know it pushes it through the Krebs cycle and eliminates it, lowers blood sugar. That's why if you're not fat adapted and you take high doses of taurine, you could cause yourself a hypoglycemic shock. So please don't do it until you're fat adapted before you start experimenting with higher amounts. Okay? So and a species-appropriate diet eliminates these problems. And we talk about lipid peroxidation here in the first place to get the methylglyoxal. And remember, to get over trace levels, remember the videos that I did, the PUFA ones, because they're the most vulnerable parts of the actual fatty acids? Well, if you go and take a look at those videos, you'll actually see after 3 hours, trace amounts. You have to basically cook the damn stuff for about 32 hours before you get into any significant problems. So it's nonsense. The real issue is acetone. And we know that a plant-based ketogenic diet or plant-based or a low-protein ketogenic diet is going to create more acetone. But then again, you've upregulated the intracellular antioxidants and it's less of a problem anyway. You know, it's going to mitigate because that's going to deal with this and it's going to push it down this pathway and it's not going to go into that pathway. We see that when we actually go to ketogenic diet, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, cerebral vascular disease, neurodegenerative disorders, aging, epigenetics, infertility, cancer, and all this sort of stuff goes away. So that's not the case. Paul just did a bit of a misdirect. Why? You know, we actually pointed out to him. We actually said, Paul, you're not eating enough protein. That's why you can't regulate your electrolytes, because you need to have sufficient protein to get a slight you know, a bit of an increase in insulin once in the day, which helps. And also you're going to be getting more taurine, which is going to help regulate ions at the kidney level and will mitigate that problem. I've discussed it before, covered it profusely in all sorts of videos and stuff like that. But pretty much Paul just needed a way out from the criticism. He just couldn't cope with the criticism. So he basically came up with found a study that could actually cause a misdirect. So he could actually go, oh, look here. Don't look at what I'm doing, guzzling down heaps and heaps of sugar that are causing these problems that are much higher. Remember what I showed you earlier? 120 milligrams. Even burnt coffee, like a burnt coffee, is in the micrograms. So even the highest one was about 0.4 of a milligram, where he's doing 120 milligrams from the actual honey. The honey has got much higher. Now, methylglyoxal has some benefits. Oh, yes, it does. That's the key component that actually it has like antiseptic properties, like antimicrobial properties. So as a topical thing, it's quite good. I mean, I use Manuka honey on my skin if I get, as an antibiotic. Rather than using antibiotics, I use methylglyoxal that'll actually keep the bugs like streptococcus and things like that under control. So it does that. It's brilliant for that. Don't eat it. Just put it on your skin. It's great for any scratches, any infections or whatever on your skin. Fantastic stuff. So it does have benefits, but not as a food, but as a medicinal thing, as a skin, that you can actually, let's say if you've got streptococcus in your throat, you can actually warm water, put a bit of honey in it, mix it up and gargle it and spit it out. You don't have to ingest it. It's a bit like Lewinsky. You know, I won't go into that. Anyway, yes, don't swallow. Spit it out, whatever you do. Anyway, yes, enough about Monica. And so, generally speaking, it's only a problem if you're ingesting 120 milligrams of the stuff because you're consuming shitloads of it. I can't believe that he's consuming 200 grams. I mean, God, how do you consume 200 grams of honey every day? That's a lot of honey. Even 100 grams is a lot of honey. You're down to 60 milligrams. That's still a lot in terms of methylglyoxal compared to all the other stuff. All the other stuff is much lower. Even on the ketogenic diet is much lower the production that's produced even on a plant-based that's producing acetone. It's still lower. So even on that basis, he's still doing a misdirect. He's not being honest. Because his food is one of the highest sources of this stuff. It's the reason why we use it as a topical damn thing, because methylglyoxal is a great antimicrobial substance. I mean, the higher the amount, it's considered to have the higher levels of, of antimicrobial properties. This is why another problem probably that it's not probably good to ingest it and have it in the gut, because it may potentially cause some disturbances in the gut microbiome if you consume too much of it, because it's got antimicrobial properties. So maybe some people has the potential to cause, potential things like growths of, reducing the bacterial stuff. Fungi can take hold. There is that candida problem that some people have. I'm not claiming that honey is going to cause candida or cause fungal infections, but if you're basically reducing certain things, is there potential for opportunistics to take hold? I'll leave that to your thinking, but there's always those possibilities. The problem is we don't have those studies. That is just a speculation on my part. But Paul seems to make claims as if it's actual truth. I'm going to have a bit of fun and speculate about his honey consuming practices. Maybe stuffing up his gut microbiome and letting those little candida fellas take control of his brain and mind, and probably showing on his skin. Probably that's what could be it. Somebody should, maybe he needs to provide a sample. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, had a bit of fun. That's covering Mr. Saladino and his views. Let's say his misdirects on methylglyoxal, and showing some of the providing some of the information, but not all. The nice thing about taurine, it does ameliorate a lot of these problems, and it does reduce advanced glycation in products, and it does also reduce sugar in the bloodstream. I will cover that in another video. And so this is the benefits of eating an animal-based diet. You will lower your blood sugar levels. It's well known. I mean, it's one reason why even doctors are aware of taurine, and that they warn certain people that are on medication, like, sugar lowering medication, to be careful with soft drinks that have got a lot of taurine in them, for the exactly same reason that it could actually cause hypoglycemia. So they're well aware of this. They're not. It's not as if, and Paul, I suspect, would be well aware as well, but he's being a bit, he doesn't. Why doesn't he mention? He knows that sugar molecules, if they're brought down, reduced, you reduce the amount of circulating sugar. That's going to reduce the amount of methylglyoxal that can be in the system. Why doesn't he mention that? He, let's say, through omitting a lot of things, he's able to basically justify to his followers his style of, let's say, contraindicating eating. So people need to call him up on this sort of stuff. Anyway, I'll leave that to you lovely people out there in social media land to pester him about this issue. Anyway, I'll leave it there. That's pretty much me covering that point. Please do pass it on to Paul's friends. Maybe they could be slightly better educated after this video. Maybe not. Who knows how much they are, have cognitive dissonance when it comes to this issue. Who knows? Anyway, I'll leave it at that. See you guys.